Start off this morning, you can tell I'm in Sunday church mode. This evening, let me pray for us. Father, we are grateful for the time you've blessed us with. We're here and we want to learn a little bit more about your word, the Bible, and about your word, Jesus. So enlighten us, help us to understand, help us have good conversation, to be humble, curious, to reach out further maybe than we've reached before, and to still truly want to please and glorify you in everything. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, here's the disclaimer for all people who are new on here. As always, my 30-second disclaimer is this class is specifically designed to pull you out of your comfort zones. Anything that I'm saying, there's no guarantee that it's right. We are playing.
All right, see ya.
Okay. Bye.
People are leaving right now. Yeah, of course they are. We're playing. We want to try to understand things, and we know that the Christian world is much larger than our small evangelical world, and so we want to play in that larger biblical interpretive world. And sometimes some of the stuff that I've thought about, you might not have thought about yet, and sometimes you've thought about stuff I haven't. So we do this kind of theology in community. It keeps us safe. It keeps us kind of in a box. We jump out of this box today, but we jump back into the box, I hope, at least some of the box. Everyone's got a box. It's just a matter of how big it is. And so we are delighted to get to play with the edges a little bit tonight. So let's talk. So this was not planned. We had planned to stop last week, but we decided we'd keep going for one more week because apparently we didn't get to talk about the subject that everybody wanted to talk about the most. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to eventually get to this topic. If you can read this, this is the sex topic. People want to know how far is too far. Some of you haven't been 16 in a long time, but I'm guessing we all still live in that purity culture. So we're going to get there, but let's review the reason that I am the person talking about this, because I don't know much about the actual subject that we're going to talk about, is because I'm a hermeneutics guy. So this is my world. So we're introducing this idea of what Bill Webb calls a redemptive movement hermeneutic. So here's what we started with 6 weeks ago. We started with this big question of what does wisdom look like? We talked about wisdom literature. Right? Wisdom literature are things like Proverbs and some of the Psalms and Songs and Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. What else is Songs? Yeah, those kinds of books, right, are wisdom. And then there's little pieces of wisdom in lots of other books as well. But these are your main books that talk about this. We dealt mostly with Proverbs. And we didn't deal with all the little things that show up in chapters 10 through 30. We dealt mostly with chapters 1 through 9 and 31. And I was arguing in there that there is a narrative story that is taking place, right? There is this split in the road where the boy is coming, this young man is coming, and he has to choose which direction he's going to go. Is he going to go this or this? Is he going to go towards Lady Folly, or is he going to go towards Lady Wisdom? And something is wrong with our beauty barometer, right? And for some reason, we seem to choose folly an awful lot, okay? Some people theologically would say this is because of the fall, right? Because of original sin. Some would just say it's just who we are now. It didn't have anything to do with that. Whatever the case is, you know it's true. We choose folly a lot more often than we should. Even though we see, like, this is the better move, we still are like, yeah, but I still want to do this one. Okay, this is where this whole hour that we're spending together is going to come back to, right? Which one will we choose? In here, we've argued that wisdom actually, in some sense, is going to lead us to Jesus, right? Because in Colossians and several other passages in the New Testament, he is called the wisdom of God. He is the logos. He is the rationale. He is that which they've been leading up to this whole time. So we're going to say that Jesus is actually the ultimate ethic. Now, if you're new here, this might not all make sense to you, and I'm sorry. I'm trying to do several weeks in 3 minutes, okay? But this idea of an ultimate ethic is us asking that larger question, what is the end goal of our morality? What is it that we should be doing in regard to a million questions, right? Should we have slavery? Should we abort children? Should we allow for homosexuality in the military or in anything? Can we allow for polygamy? What about spanking our children? What about killing? Tomorrow in Texas, they're going to put someone to death, right? What about capital punishment? What about war and violence? Okay, and tonight mainly, what about sex? How far can we go? So we're looking for the ultimate ethic. Where is it supposed to go? Does the Old Testament give us the ultimate ethic? Does the New Testament give us the ultimate ethic? Or is there something, as I. Howard Marshall called it, beyond the Bible? Something that goes beyond. That doesn't mean the Quran or something like that, but us looking and seeing what this trajectory is, or what this redemptive movement is. Does that make sense so far? That's my summary of wisdom. We also talked about law. And we showed that there's a lot of law, or Yerah, right? Torah, instruction, guidance. Okay, it doesn't mean like rules like red light necessarily, but instruction. And it's a beautiful thing. All throughout the Old Testament, the law is a beautiful thing. And it tells us things like don't kill, don't cheat on your wife, don't steal, don't put up other gods in front of your God, things like that, right? Keep the Sabbath holy. It also has all kinds of other laws, like if you're a male, you can't sleep with a male, according to Leviticus. You can't sleep with animals. You can't staying on the sex theme, right? You can't do certain things like that. Or you can't have tattoos. We've talked about that. You can't go into holy places if you ladies are in a certain time of the month. Those kinds of things, all these rules that we have to follow. Which ones do we actually have to follow? Is the question we're trying to figure out. Because some of you, or maybe all of you, have tattoos. Okay, so you've decided that that's a law you don't have to follow. Or some of you in the New Testament, you're not supposed to wear braided hair or pearls, right? But you've decided you don't have to follow that one because it's culturally irrelevant now for you. But you've just made that decision. Maybe some of you just made that decision because you don't like the other decision. So it's a pragmatic reason. Maybe some of you have done the hermeneutics in your mind, but most of us just do what we're used to doing, right? So yeah, of course we're gonna braid our hair. If braiding our hair is in style, then we're gonna do it. It's no problem. Okay, so we're talking about the law. So the question is, should we be looking at laws, either apodictic ones or casuistic ones? Casuistic, right? That is the big general laws, thou shalt not kill, or the more specific laws that define what it means to kill. Okay, should we be following these laws, or should we be following wisdom? And both the law and wisdom end up eventually in Jesus. That's been my argument throughout this whole thing. So chapters 1 through 9 of Proverbs are all leading us this path between either choosing folly or Jesus, wisdom. Okay, so third point that I want to say as a review is that the law is illustration. Okay, this is one of the arguments that I've made early on, that laws are simply illustrations of wisdom. Okay, let that settle in your mind. I've said it a lot. If you're new, you haven't heard it a lot, or maybe you've heard it a lot and it still hasn't stuck. But perhaps the law is just an illustration of wisdom. That is, for a particular epoch, a particular time, a particular culture, that law is super helpful for them during that time in their place in order for them to be wise. So they need some rules to help them be wise. Just as I make certain rules for my 3-year-old about the street to help them be wise, even though I don't care too much about the rules about the street, right? Eventually, my goal is to let my child go into the street and actually buy a car and actually move out of my house and be independent, right? But at 3 years old, there's a particular rule that he has to lead him into wisdom. So my argument has been, maybe all of the rules are designed to lead us into wisdom and not designed to be eternal, universal rules. Okay, that should be a little scary if you start thinking about it. Okay, it doesn't go very far. Like, okay, but then what about the examples, which is what we're going to do today, right? How are we going to? We're going to have to deal with each one of these things. So law is an illustration of wisdom. The fourth thing, which we finally got to last week, which was supposed to be the culmination of everything, was what I call this redemptive hermeneutic, redemptive movement. Okay. In the hermeneutics literature, this is just what we call trajectory. Okay. So it's trajectory hermeneutic. Okay. That is that hermeneutic just means interpretation, right? So trying to interpret the Bible as if there's a trajectory. The Bible's taking us somewhere. And I used Bill Webb's particular trajectory thing, which is redemptive movement hermeneutic. And I gave you his PowerPoint on, just looking at the football field, right? And I said, way back here is the ancient Near East. That is the world that they lived in the Old Testament. They lived in the ancient Near East. And they had certain rules and certain laws. And you know that that's true. The Old Testament gives you certain laws, but there are other laws that exist long before the Old Testament. The Code of Hammurabi is hundreds of years before any version of our Old Testament could have come about, and it looks very similar to ours, or rather, ours looks very similar to it. Okay, that might concern you, but it shouldn't. Okay, that is, they've created rules for their particular world, just as Israel's created rules for their particular world. So there's something going on in the ancient Near East. Let's say when it comes to violence, right, that you can rape and pillage and kill. Okay, that's what's happening in the ancient Near East. So the Old Testament comes along and it says, okay, here's the world that we live in. We've got to put some kind of rules on things. Okay, because this is not cool. So now it goes really far, like in its ethic, and says things like, well, when you rape somebody, you should make sure that you marry them after and don't treat them horribly for the rest of their life. Okay? When you take slaves and you pillage and take all of their things with them, you should treat them a little bit better than just they're property, but you shouldn't kill them without like really good cause. Okay, and I'm exaggerating what the Old Testament is saying right now. So yeah, it's not quite so bad as all of that. But this is what we did last week, right? We read all of these verses and they were hopefully mind-blowing to you. Okay, because we just read over those verses very quickly that say, here's what you do when you make sure that you kidnap young virgins, make sure you treat them like this. Like, okay, so it's okay to kidnap young virgins? All right, great, right? So that's what's going on here. Slavery, right? Take slaves, all these different things. Homosexuality, okay? Maybe so we can include sex in here. So this is the world they live in, and now there are certain rules that say, okay, sex is good, go for it, and there's even some violent sex going on here, but let's put some boundaries on it. Okay, all that was last week. Okay, then I said there's a New Testament too. The New Testament comes along. And it goes back to the Old Testament and it says, well, the Old Testament was helpful, but here's some new ways of thinking about some things. Okay. What I don't want to say is that the Old Testament is actually being canceled out. So we don't want to be Marcionites here. Okay. That the God of the Old Testament is somehow different than the God of the New Testament, that the Old Testament doesn't matter. It's super important. I'm an Old Testament guy. This is my whole life. It's very important. But they talk in terms of it being abolished in Hebrews or fulfilled in Matthew. Okay, so however you understand that, there's some sort of movement into a new covenant. Okay, and I talked about last week a deeper magic that is underneath all of these rules that maybe we're supposed to get to, which we're going to get back to in just a second. All right, but the New Testament moves them forward. So we have this redemptive movement. As God is moving in the lives of the world, redemptively, right? As he's redeeming his people, as he's calling out a kingdom of priests, he's saying, be different than the people around you. Then he's saying, be really different than the people around. It's continuing to progress. And so our question, when we deal with the sex question in just a second, is going to be, is there room for us to progress past here? Can we go beyond the Bible? Okay. And again, that should be a little scary to us, because now we have no more boundaries, or at least it seems like we have no more boundaries. Recall last week, though, Lori said, she's not on here today, but she gave a great analogy. She said, if I asked you a question, what number comes between 7 and 9, your immediate answer would hopefully be 8. But the reality is that there's lots of numbers between 7 and 9, right? There's 7.1, there's 7.2, there's 7.3, there's 7.12, there's 7.123, there's 7.175, right? There's millions, maybe an infinite number of numbers in between there. But while there are lots of answers, there are some that are not the right answer. Like 5 is not the right answer in any way. Is that not? So there's an infinite amount of other answers that are wrong. So maybe we can come close to an answer, even if we don't know exactly what it is. It has to be between 7 and 9. It can't be 10 or other things, but there's a lot of room in here. And what the church has always said is the answer is 8. Actually, that's not even true. The church hasn't always said that, but that seems to be where we're at with the church, right? The church gives us the rule. Here's the rule. The answer is 8. And the reality is the church for thousands of years has given quite a lot of freedom in there with what the answers are. And we're just now starting to come back to that, maybe, or at least us here on Zoom today and Facebook Live are. The question is, what is the ultimate ethic? Can we go beyond this? And we talked about the 3 areas being slavery last week, women, and sex. And we spent almost all of our time on slavery and women and not really on sex. So if you see slavery, they can do a lot of things. They can't be really mean to their slaves. Slaves are basically treated as regular human beings. The question is, should we move with William Wilberforce and everybody else, Martin Luther King Jr., and completely remove slavery from the world, and then completely remove any kind of segregation, and completely move any ideas of different races or whatever? Where do we go past here? So the New Testament seems to be okay with slavery, but my guess is all of you think it's wrong. So we're arguing that it has moved forward. Okay, women in ministry. Okay, this is a little bit more controversial depending on what church you're in, right? But there's 2 different views on women. One is called complementarianism. I knew I shouldn't have wrote that, that was too long. And egalitarianism. Okay, so one is that women can be ministering in churches. That's the equal side. They can be pastors and elders. And complementarian would say, no, they can't be. They're not allowed to be leaders in churches. They can be deacons, maybe. They can be other things. It doesn't say they're not equal, but they're not equal in roles. I've been in both churches. Both are very comfortable. Both are very trying to follow God's way. They're not, none of the churches I've been to have been mean to women. Like it's been very respectful. So both of these are good views. The question is, like in the church that I'm currently in, an eco church, we believe that women can be pastors. So we're actually looking at this church right now, at a female pastor, possibly. It's a possibility. Okay. But in some of your churches, you never would be. Either. And the reason is because you don't, if you're a complementarian, you would stop here. If you're an egalitarian, you think you should keep going. You should follow that there's been a movement in regards to women's understanding, women's roles, women's respect as the movement goes. Does the redemptive movement hermeneutic make sense in your mind? At least? Okay, excellent. So keep the football in mind. We started to deal with homosexuality. What Bill Webb says in his on this is that homosexuality looks a certain way here in the ancient Near East, and it looks exactly the same here in the Old Testament, and exactly the same here in the New Testament. So he doesn't see a movement forward. Basically, homosexuality is an abomination through each one.
This is what he's preaching right now.
Okay. Did somebody say something? Yeah. Okay. So that's his argument. You might see that there is some sort of movement forward, that you think we should continue to progress. So a lot of churches, right, they're perfectly fine with saying homosexuality is a perfectly legitimate Christian response. It's a way that we can be Jesus's too. We love just like anybody else loves. We're created this way. You know, all those, we all live in the same world, right? Okay. So you've got to figure out what you think on each one of these things. But then there's all these other things, right? Corporal punishment, all the things that we talked about. I don't need to write them all down, right? Capital punishment. How do we move through each one of these? And we can't do that in 45 minutes, right? We can't go through these because we'd have to look at every verse from the Old Testament, move it forward into the New Testament, and move forward and see what there's a final ethic that we appreciate better. Okay. But we can talk for fun today about some of these, just to get our minds started. So this is kind of I'm thinking this is going to be the last one on this topic, although I've had some people say, let's forget the redemptive hermeneutic on sexuality. Let's just talk about sexuality in general, because there's a lot to be learned there. And I haven't done all the research on this, but I'm thinking about that for the future. We could do like a 4-week series on it, because everybody likes to talk about sex, right? Doesn't matter who you are, everyone likes talking about it. Okay, so let's talk about sex.
Maybe.
Questions? Somebody gave me a thumbs up, or I don't know what this. Everyone's smiling, but I didn't hear what was said. So.
Travis is singing.
And on the back of the
Oh, he's singing the song. All right, good job. Gotcha. Let's talk about sex, baby. All right, so you guys, I'm guessing, grew up in similar world that I did. That I did. We call it now. We look back on it as the purity culture movement, right? Do you guys remember this? You had. You can tell me, but Josh McDowell's, right? Two Love Waits. Maybe your dad gave you, if you're a female, gave you a ring and you wore it around your neck or something like that, or you wore it on your finger and it meant that you were his until you were someone else's, right? So it's a little creepy, but you get the idea. I mean, it wasn't creepy at the time. It made perfect sense.
Sex was bad, and it was all the woman's fault.
Okay. All right. That's a very specific sex purity culture view, that sex is bad and that it's the woman's fault. I did not grow up with that particular view. Did the rest of you? Did the rest of you think sex was bad, or was it just bad for you at that time? Did anybody share Travis's, like, if we just taught sex was bad? Maybe you weren't taught it. I'm guessing parents didn't say sex is bad because you existed, right? So they had sex. But you just got this feeling in general, this like, we don't talk about this is not good. That's probably fair.
It was bad until you were married, and then you're supposed to flip a switch, and then it was good. So,
Right.
any sexuality whatsoever in the media or in, music or movies was like bad, and you didn't want to, you couldn't see that because it would corrupt your brain and you would be bad too. So yeah, it was definitely like any sexuality had to be within marriage, and we weren't supposed to notice the fact that humans are sexual in general.
Right. So you just get rid of anything in a movie. You just can't watch it if it has that in it. You can't listen to George Michael, right? Guess it would be nice to touch your body. You can't sing any of those songs, or basically any song from the 80s you're not allowed to listen to, right? At least that was my rule. I wasn't allowed. My dad's right there. I was not allowed to listen to 80s rock. It was Guns N' Roses and Aerosmith, and I snuck the stuff. I had tapes in my car. I snuck it in. Sorry, Dad. I love you. But yeah. Okay. I'm glad he's muted.
Sons are watching, right? Look,
What was that, Sarah?
I said your sons are watching this and learning from you.
Oh yeah. No, I know. But I think, honestly, I don't think I have anything to hide from my children. I think they know all of my past. I don't think I've hid anything from them, and most of my present. So, but they're going to find out a lot today, probably, as you guys ask questions. Anything that I did not, but I have no desire to hide it from them. I think that's actually a pretty good thing to think through. Like, what do you want to tell your children? And, you know, I don't have a problem if they know how many mistakes I made or how successful I was, both of those. I think they're both really helpful to them.
So in the 70s, parents didn't really talk about it.
Okay, so you didn't talk about it in the 70s.
Not really. It was hippies and free love. It was plastered in front of us, but we didn't really discuss it at home.
Okay, you mean with your parents?
With
You didn't
parents,
discuss
yeah.
it?
We discussed it with each other at school, but we really didn't discuss it that much at home.
Yeah,
Just don't do it, and that was no question.
sure.
Yeah, but everywhere you looked in the 70s, posters, T-shirts, everything was free love.
Yep. But I wouldn't say that changes a lot through each generation. We're
Not
still-
really. It looks a little different, but it's still plastered out there for the kids.
And so what the evangelicals did, right, is they created their own alternative culture because they knew we can be in the world, but not of the world. So we want to create our own culture, and our own culture means that we promise to be pure until our wedding night. We kiss dating goodbye, some of us that was after my time, but you guys remember Josh Harris. He's still pretty popular, I guess, for different reasons now. And has actually recanted all the stuff from his book, which is phenomenal and interesting. So yeah, what was any other purity culture conversation? Like, is there something that you had to do that was different than all of your friends had to do?
Can't wear two-piece suit. I really wanted to wear two pieces myself.
You wanted to wear what?
Two-piece swimming suits. No showing shoulders. No, all that stuff. Being different that way. Modesty. It was just on our church webpage here locally. There's a swim party. Make sure and dress modestly. I'm sure they weren't talking to the guys. They were probably talking. It wasn't gender specific, but everybody knew what they were talking about.
So can I wear Speedos to that or not?
I don't know.
Let's just say wisdom says no, please, Davin. No. That's the best I can give you there. Not for rules, but wisdom says, dear God, no. So yeah, modesty, right? So modesty is a big thing, and it's almost always 90% pointed to women, right? Women, you need to help us because we are just horny, sex-filled creeps.
Well, that's true. So
Yeah, it's not wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying this is the message that we've constantly gotten, right? We can't control ourselves, so you guys need to cover up. There should never be cleavage. There should never be anything that hints at anything, right? That's your gift to us. Be kind so our minds can stay pure, right? And by the way, even as I ridicule purity culture, there is a lot to be said for that, okay? I don't want to just totally ignore all of those things. What they're trying to do is find an alternative to what was going on. And perhaps they went too far, but we need to take that into consideration. One thing I don't want to do is jump from one side to the other, right? We can be wise and see the good in ladies, please be kind to us. Okay, that's not a horrible thing to ask of you. Okay, because our minds do certain things. But anyway, that's not really our topic.
Actually, but Jace, that's a fantastic point that probably needs to be emphasized more and more and more. There is too much swinging one way to the other, swinging one way to the other, and never just a real discussion of, wait, why did they do that? What were they really doing that for? Okay, so if you Google purity culture now, all you're going to see is, oh, why it's so harmful and why it was so bad. It's like, no, that's not what was really their intent was. So just, you got to keep that in mind.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and how can we keep the good and then learn from the bad and try and ferret that out somehow? Like, yes, there's some truth. Guys are horn dogs, a lot of us, probably not all of us, right? There's eunuchs in the world and things like that, but most of us are horn dogs. But that doesn't mean that we blame it on women. Maybe we need to recognize how we need to improve ourselves instead of just blaming it on women all the time. Things like that. Like, so how can we take the basic idea and like the good behind it and try and ferret out the bad, potentially?
Yeah. And isn't this the big, I mean, this was kind of the bigger part of this wisdom thing, is in our culture currently, we do tend to go from one side to the other, right? You're either a ridiculous Republican or a ridiculous Democrat. There's no middle ground where we can listen to each other and hear the different views. You either believe in masks or you think masks are horrible, right? There's no like, hey, can we have a conversation about this? Like maybe masks are good sometimes and not some, you know, there are middle grounds to everything. So the
Well,
period,
I don't know if it's a middle ground. There's no metric by which we're judging it.
okay. Yeah. All right. So that's fair. Yeah. We're trying to find that middle ground because that's exactly the ground that we think, you know, middle is the right where the centrist is where I am. It's the perfect spot. But yes, we are just trying to say, can we take both sides into account is my point, right? And whatever these sides are. So purity culture is not a bad thing necessarily. What's happened is probably pretty bad. And what's happened is what Travis said earlier, right? We were just told sex and Hannah, we were just told sex is bad. And then we got to turn a switch once we get married and now it's good already, good again. Like, and that's damaging. That's pretty painful. All right, so now the question, right? What can we do? What are we supposed to be teaching? What am I supposed to be teaching my 2 children who are right here, right now? So be careful with what you say. Actually, you don't have to be careful at all. That's hopefully how I've raised them to listen very well. But not only that, like we have single people listening as well here, right? And I guess we can even include married people. It's not like you've stopped thinking about sex. And even outside of marriage sex, right? So what does this look like? We're trying to think through a progressive, a redemptive hermeneutic, and a movement hermeneutic that we're going forward on. So I got some verses here. I came a little bit prepared, but not a whole lot. So this is all I have left to offer. So here's what I'm gonna do for the next few minutes. I wanna read you some verses so that we can see sort of a movement if there is one. Okay, and as far as I know, I've exhaustively gotten every single verse that deals with sex in the Bible. No, it's not true. There are thousands upon thousands of verses. But I've tried to get the ones that seem to have rules on them. Okay, so that's the question. What are the rules? So you remember Genesis starts out with this kind of with sexuality. Be fruitful and multiply is basically saying go out and have sex, have lots of kids, right? Leave a father and mother, you shall cleave to your wife, and become one flesh. Joseph, remember the Joseph story? She tempts him, she tries to seduce him. He says, no, I won't be a part of that. Okay, now these are stories told to give you some sort of an ethic, at least, to help us to start thinking about this. Like Joseph is a good person for saying no to sleeping with his master's wife. Exodus talks about don't sleep with animals. Leviticus says don't lie with a male as with a woman. It's an abomination. Leviticus, again, says the same thing. Don't lie with a male, etc. Song of Songs is really big. I'm not going to include every Levitical comment about sexuality or we're going to be here all day long. But you know that it's against homosexuality. It's against something we'll call sexual immorality. It's against, it's against all kinds of things, even just like menstruation periods and things like that keep you from better, holier things. So again, just for women, apparently, in that case. So Song of Songs, again, we could read the entire book of Song of Songs, which might be fun sometime. But let's see here. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag on cleft mountains. Awake, O north wind. I'm gonna go ahead. You see if you can not giggle through some of these, all right? Awake, O north wind, and come, O south wind. Blow upon my garden. Let its spices flow. Let the beloved come to his garden and eat its choicest fruit. Okay, this is some pretty raunchy literature. Okay, this is not stuff that I was supposed to be reading before I got married. Okay, how beautiful and pleasant you are, O loved one, with all your delights. Your stature is like a palm tree. Your breasts are like its clusters. He talks about climbing up this palm tree and getting her fruits. Okay, you can just you can use your imagination. I don't want to turn you on too much. Also, some stuff in here about not getting your love ready, not stirring or awakening love before it's ready. Okay, so that's also in Song of Songs. Gazelles, young stags, beautiful poetry. Job says this: I've made a covenant with my eyes that I would not gaze lustfully on a woman. Okay, so that's interesting. So he in his righteousness has said, I've made an agreement with my eyes not to look lustfully, or really just to stare at a virgin, is how it is, to gaze at a virgin. Proverbs, let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delights. Be intoxicated always in her love. So this is a good comment, right? Song of Songs and this are good ones for sure. He who commits adultery lacks sense. So that's dealing with that. Okay, and you can see some of these, certainly some analogies or allegories throughout, like Hosea and his prostitute wife, or Israel in general being a whore throughout the Bible, is don't sleep with other women that are not your wife, or don't sleep with other countries that you are not supposed to be dedicated to, or other gods is the idea here, right? So idolatry and adultery are really the same thing, okay, in the Old Testament. So when you commit adultery with your country, that's idolatry. You're trading God for a lesser lover, and he's jealous. He says all the time. Okay, so Mark, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. For within him, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, and then a whole bunch of others, including sensuality, pride, foolishness, etc., adultery, covetousness. Okay, so sexual immorality, that's going to be a big word that we want to talk about. Matthew 5, I say to everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So you've already done something just by having lustful thoughts. Out of your heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery. This is another passage later on. Acts says that you abstain from what you sacrifice to idols, and from blood, and from what has been strangled, and from sexual immorality. So that's the agreement the church makes. It's compromise, that you abstain from sexual immorality. Romans 1 talks about women exchanging natural relations for unnatural ones. And you have to figure out what that is. Probably most people would say it has to do with homosexuality in these cases. Romans 13, let us walk properly, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality. 1 Corinthians, it is reported there is sexual immorality among you, and a kind that is not tolerated even among pagans. For a man has his father's wife. Okay, so this is pretty key. Sexual immorality, which is just this one word, it's the word porneia. You see it today, right? It's the word porn. That's where it comes from, porneia. It has different meanings throughout here. In this case, this sexual immorality is a man has his father's wife. Okay. Oftentimes, if you're reading the King James Version, when you see the word porneia, it's translated fornication. And you know what fornication means in your King James world. It means sex before marriage. Okay, but it might not be a fair translation for us to go there. So at least we can open that idea up. 1 Corinthians 6, don't be deceived, neither the sexually immoral, nor the idolaters, or those who practice homosexuality, etc. They're not going to inherit the kingdom of God. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. And God talks a lot about, he makes, the body's not meant for sexual immorality. Our body, we shouldn't be combined with prostitutes. And let's see, or do you not know that he was joined to a prostitute? This is an interesting one, so I should probably emphasize this. Do you not know that he was joined to a prostitute, becomes one body with her? For as it is written, the two will become one flesh. So I was talking with a couple of you this last week about what it means to be married, what the definition of marriage is, which is very difficult. Right here, it seems to say if you sleep with a prostitute, you become one body with her, in the same sense of Genesis, that the two become one flesh. So there's something going on there, even if you have a prostitute. 1 Corinthians 6, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin is a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. So there's this long text about how important this sin is in regard to other sins. Okay, whatever the sin is, sexual immorality. It is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. Maybe that's the one that you guys were all taught when you were younger. But because of temptation, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. And then the husband should give conjugal rights to his wife. They should allow each other to have sex as much as they want, whatever that is, unless a certain amount of time for prayer. That's the reason you get away. So no ladies, it's usually ladies. Ladies, you shouldn't keep yourself from your man, right? We can say it's for both, but remember, the Bible is pretty much written to men. Sorry.
I'm
The
in.
unmarried and the widows, I say it's good for them to remain single as I am, but if they can't exercise self-control, they should marry. It's better to marry than to burn with passion. Don't indulge in sexual immorality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. Here you go, kids, right? Don't do it. 23,000 people died in one day. So when you're thinking about that at 10 o'clock on Friday night, don't do it. Was that a raised hand?
Can you read the one that you just did before that one again?
Yes, let's see. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am. But if they can't exercise self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion.
What verse is that? What is it?
That is 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse, 1 Corinthians 7, verses 8 and 9. And it is a controversial passage as to what it means. All right, let's see. I fear that when I come again, God may humble me before you, and I have to mourn over many of those who have sinned earlier. I haven't repented of the impurity, sexual immorality, and sensuality that they have practiced. The works of the flesh are evident. This is Galatians: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality. Sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, as is proper among the saints. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion. All of these are Paul. Okay, so you can hear the same list over and over again. So maybe I won't keep reading. 1 Thessalonians, 1 Timothy, the sexually immoral men who practice homosexuality, enslavers, etc. Flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness. That's going to be an important one as we talk about wisdom. Fleeing youthful passions, pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. What we'd have to ask is it possible that I might have passions that aren't youthful passions that a 20-year-old is going to have that are youthful passions, even though they're the same passion, but they're not youthful, right? Which is one okay and one not okay? Anyway, 1 Peter, beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles, abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Let marriage be held in honor among all, the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and the adulterous. Don't love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father isn't in him. All that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, the pride and possessions, is not from the Father, but is from the world. Jude talks about them pursuing unnatural desire and indulging in sexual immorality, and the punishment being eternal fire. Finally, Revelation, last one. As for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be the lake that burns with fire and sulfur. That is the second death. So those of you who are sexually immoral are going into a lake of fire and sulfur, along with those people who are liars and sorcerers and idolaters. Okay, so you've now heard all the laws about sex. So Travis assured me that there would be lots of discussion.
I have something to say.
I can't wait. Please tell me.
So, in our society, isn't it true that children grow up a lot slower, I think, than they did or were forced to back in the time of the Bible? So the verse that we're talking about, if you burn with desire, you should marry lest you fall into sin or whatever. And so good Christian boys and girls that go to Christian college and Bible college get married at 18 and 19 and don't know themselves whatsoever and aren't mature enough to really understand the commitment that they're making, but they do it because they don't want to sin and they just want to have sex. and they love each other, but then they get into really horrible marriages. I've read several accounts of this where people get into abusive marriages or just really don't know themselves well enough to be in a committed relationship, and then want to get out because it's really bad. And then the church then turns on the other side and says, no, you have to stay. Divorce is sin. And you need to pray, stay and pray, right? So
That's what I was going to mention about that verse too.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is to that. And but there is this whole piece where like literally that's the reason young adults get married in the Christian world, is because they don't want, that's what they're supposed to do. So there's this whole narrative of too, that you're supposed to get married and have kids, and that's your whole purpose. But our society doesn't lend to that when there are, careers and things. And a lot of people, that aren't living that same way don't have kids until their late 20s or 30s. And it's just a totally different. So I'll let someone else talk if they have something to say about that.
So the question that you're asking, it's not really a question, but you're making that there is a difference between an 18-year-old and a 30-year-old, which is, right? I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
And then and when I don't know if this is like speaking of Bible times, but weren't they getting married at 13, 14, 15 years old?
Yeah. The females
or roles apply differently to men. So if they were burning with desire, they could get away with it, and women just had to wait or whatever. So yeah, my question is, how do you, what is the language for that too? Because I think that that's a dangerous thing too. I don't really want my kids to get married just because they want to have sex at 18 or 19. Surely if they're in love, and that's what they want to do, but that's just an interesting, I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like Paul's wisdom was get married quickly so you can have sex. Your wisdom would be slow down, make sure, he who hesitates is lost versus look before you leave, which is the right problem, right? So.
Well, and then the question is, do you allow for sex in the interim, or do you still abstain?
Right. Yeah, so that's the question. So somebody who's 25 years old, who's going to wait till they're 30 to get married, should we be asking them to stay pure as well as a 16-year-old?
Well, and define sex.
Well, we're evangelical Christians, so we mean, everything's okay except for penetration.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, if you're
I'm so tempted to start writing on the board, but I don't really know what to write. So I'm going to.
If that's going to be your rule, then you shouldn't have hard rules on anything, because that's not a hard rule.
Correct. Yeah. All right. So we have to somehow, to answer this question, we have to define sex. Wow. Yeah, that's what you just came into. We have to define sex, and we have to decide whether there's a different age that's allowed for different, and you have to do this together, right? So 16-year-old sexuality, the most you can be is holding hands. 30-year-olds, the most you can do is, we're all adults here, except most of us are adults here, right? I don't know, 30-year-old sex, the most you can do is oral. And you can't, as Travis just said, penetration doesn't happen until you actually have a ring on the finger. Are these our rules? And are we just making up stuff to make us feel better about what we want to do?
Basically.
Is it fair for me to ask my 16-year-old to only hold hands or to kiss only, but okay for me to go as far as I want? Because I do think there are some things that I am allowed to do that he's not allowed to do just because of maturity and age. Is this one of those things?
And by allowed, you mean wise versus not wise, as opposed to the word allowed. Or are you saying there's a rule?
Is there a rule? Yeah, I mean, this is the question, right? Are these rules? Because all of these things that Paul just said, they sound like rules. It doesn't sound like he's saying, here's some ways you might be able to think about these kinds of ideas. Just, I don't know, try to be careful with your sexuality. No, it's like, you're sexually immoral, you're going to hell. Don't do this. These seem to be rules. If my thesis is, if what I said last week stands true, I'm saying they're not so much rules as they are ways to lead us into wisdom, or rules or illustrations of wisdom for a particular time. Has our time 2,000 years later moved differently, and we need to be thinking about it differently? Or am I stuck with what Paul is saying?
Should we be rethinking systematic theology?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying yes, but yes, that's a great question. Is all of our systematic theology, does it have to be rethought in light of a beyond the Bible motif, that we go beyond the Bible?
So then we have to look at how many babies can we have, and are we going to take care of them, and how many wives or husbands can we have?
Yeah, because if you're going to ask the wisdom question, that's exactly right, right? Now we have all these other questions. What about diseases? What about how many kids can we support them? All of these things are part of the sexual question. And I guess they probably always were to some degree. But for them, they had rules. I mean, what do you guys think? Can we ignore the rules, or should we have the rules?
Personally, I need rules because I'm a habitual line stepper.
Okay.
And that contradicts itself in a sense where if you tell me the rule, I have the proclivity to want to, like if you draw a line in the sand, I have the proclivity to like maybe step on the line or just kind of test the boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you can relate to me in this, maybe not, but I like to think so far outside the box that I need rules to kind of reel me back in.
Right. And this is what systematicians do, right? Systematic theology keeps us back in the box. Is it possible that there are rules, but they differ for different people? Like Josh needs rules, but I don't, as an example.
I think so. I think we still got to get to why, right? So
Okay. Yep.
If everybody had perfect wisdom, we probably wouldn't need rules, okay? But we don't, so we need rules. But when we have rules, we forget the why. What we haven't even scratched in any of this conversation is, what have we learned from biology? What do we know about us as humans, biologically, about our sex, about epigenetics, about how these behaviors control our development, who we become? Are there different rules for children? Probably, because they're in different developmental stages. We don't want to harm that.
Good.
Okay. If we really want to get into this, we got to start cracking that open. And it doesn't get us away from the Bible, it just gives us a new understanding of what God has created.
Yeah. But it might take the rules out, like you were saying. And now we're starting to use general revelation, which is absolutely what I'm trying to get us to do, to help us figure out what the Bible's intent was all along.
Right.
That's the why that you were saying. And that you're absolutely right. We need to know a whole lot more. Genetics is important. We need to know what happens in sexuality to our bodies and to our hearts and our minds, how we're knit together. Is there a difference between the way guys are knit together and girls get knit together, or 16-year-olds and 50-year-olds? Like, all of those questions I think are really important. We need to be reading science textbooks to help us figure that out. But we don't have to do any of those things if these are rules and they just need to be heeded, right? Do not, like, sexual immorality means no sex before marriage, period. The only thing we've got to figure out is how to define sex in that particular case.
And marriage.
What? What?
I said, and marriage.
And marriage, right. That's true. Yep. Got to be able to define those two things. And as long as we agree on the definition of those, sex means full penetration and ejaculation, right? Has to be all of those things in order for sex to be counted, then we can get away with an awful lot. And marriage means an actual covenant certificate that a pastor signs in a church, not in a backyard, whatever it is that your definition of it is, right? If we come up with that, then we're free. Those are the only two things we care about.
This is why rules just kind of miss the point. Like if you simplify everything to rules, you miss the whole point, because like life is not black and white, it's gray. And like if you want to talk about sex, like what's the point of sex? Like why don't we just like take it back even farther? If we're going to say God made us this way, we believe God's a creator. God made us as sexual beings. Did he make us solely as sexual beings so we could be fruitful and multiply? If your answer to that is yes, then why did he make a clitoris? Because it's purely for pleasure. It has nothing to do with reproduction. Why did he make other things? Like, so clearly there's a pleasure component designed in the system. So if God designed us to get pleasure from sex, what does that mean for us as sexual, pleasureful beings designed by our creator that way?
Yeah. That he's at least in some sense created us to desire that kind of intimacy, that closeness, that it does something in a couple that connects them in a way that nothing else can, perhaps. But I think you're right. Like you said earlier, rules, this is all just missing the point.
Mm-hmm.
I think the rules are missing the point. It's not that there are no rules. I don't think that we can go quite that far. Maybe. But they're missing the point. If we can get back to the why, like Todd says, what's the purpose of sexual intimacy? If the purpose is true knowledge of naked and not ashamed, of that kind of closeness where someone can truly see you, right? Those are things that you're giving away so much in that. And it's a beautiful thing. Do you want to give that away to everyone? Or is it designed for something specific? And then you can work backwards from that. So, well, I say it's only penetration. Well, can I get the same intimacy from doing everything but that? Right? And I don't know if you can get the same intimacy, but you can get quite a lot of intimacy from doing everything else. So maybe that's not appropriate either.
Some of the medieval,
Why being wise, not rules, wise.
Some of the medieval mystics would get that same pleasure by this. They would speak of this deep intimacy with God.
Right, and if that's the point, right? If that was the original thing,
lines
that we're supposed to be glimpsing heaven in some kind of a way, right? And they're getting that same pleasure in another way, maybe a better way.
Right.
God has provided, not a better way, but God has provided different ways for us to glimpse heaven. And this is one of those. Then, but he wants us to see it as we truly see, as we are we truly able to see someone. And that seems like it should come only with that kind of a covenantal embrace, that pact that you make. At least that seems to be the why. So if I'm talking about, I'll talk about myself just for a second. Okay, so I'm 50 years old. I have, I'm gonna just, why not, right? So I've got 5 minutes. Oh, 15, good, thank you. I have been, at this point in my life, if we're signing it off as full penetration, everything, I've been with one woman in my life, okay? And you can see 2 of my kids are here. So it was that woman. So, and I'm really glad about that. Now, as I was growing up, from 16 till 26 when I got married, I was dying, right? Like some of you are dying now. I was dying. I needed it so bad. So yeah, we did a lot of stuff. We fooled around maybe more than we should have, perhaps. Okay, but there was a lot that I didn't do with her. So on the other side of marriage, right, I still haven't been with a woman since then. So I'm 50 and I haven't, but not because of rules. Like there's no boxes that I feel like I need to check. Like I haven't done these things. For me, it has a lot more to do with what wisdom looks like. For me, in my life, because maybe I get to give something to this one woman in the world who cares about this. Because the reality is on the dating apps, they don't care. Everybody's having sex. Everyone. I haven't dated anybody except for one person who hasn't been willing to have sex with me. Not one. So they don't care. So, all right, so that's my little story, just to add it in there. I'm trying to be careful for my wisdom's sake, not because I think God is going to be angry or has all these rules or things like that, but because it's smart, it's just wise. So does anybody feel similar, or do you think maybe I need to have some rules? Josh needs some rules. Okay, marriage has some rules, right? I mean, there seem to be some rules about adultery. Definitely don't have sex outside of marriage, but we haven't defined sex. But
I mean, I think we could all agree that consent is a rule. So there's a rule there. Like, rape seems pretty unequivocally wrong.
okay. And in marriage, that's probably that consent thing is good too. Like, you can't do anything that I don't consent to for you to do with another person, right? So you've made certain agreements. So can you flirt with somebody, for instance? Well, maybe if there's consent, I guess, I don't know. But what about swingers where it's consented? It's consensual sex.
I think there was polygamy in the Bible. So if we had polygamy back then, what's wrong with polyamory now?
Okay. So-
Jace, back to what you were saying. I think the Bible puts these rules into play, like, as you said, a parent puts rules into play for a child to protect them. And like you said, that when you get so deep into a relationship, there's a point where it can be very hard to keep your focus in the right way. I can't say this. If you're out there and you're just having sex with whoever you go out with and all of this, you're going to get so hurt in the end. Physically, but yet mentally, it's going to take such a beating on your mind and your heart. So these rules, I think we can argue them whether they're for here and now or whatever, but I think they're mostly to protect us. And like you said, you get so far in, and then if it ends or something, it's so difficult to get back on track. So I can't get the words to come out right. But I think to be like you are, where you can date women and all this, but you've got a point where you stop in the intimacy and all. It's to protect you. It's to protect the other person. And that's what I see these rules as. They're protection. God cares so much for us that these rules are out there to try to keep us from getting severely hurt. We still do. We still screw up. But I don't know, are they, the conversation about, are they rules? Do we have to go by them and all that? I just think they're like a roadmap for us, so to speak. Like we give a roadmap for our kids to try to keep them on the right path. They're going to fall off. Oh my gosh, I fell off so many times, you can't count. But God always loves us when we come back, but it helps to have that map in front of us to help guide us. The people who are out having a really fun time, it's going to catch up with them. And the wisdom, that's where the wisdom comes in, that you could be out there with all these women on these dating apps or whoever can, but your wisdom is holding you back somewhat. So I think the rules are to help us have wisdom. Maybe that's where I'm going in 30,000 words.
I just want to immediately play the devil's advocate with that, though, because
okay,
it doesn't seem like any of my Christian brothers or sisters out there are with me on this. So, like,
of course,
like I said, I know it's not true that there's none. I have met some here and there, but generally, everyone that I meet is okay with sexuality in a relationship. Most of them are okay with it even first date.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm not
many
surprised.
Of them, but the more pure in our purity culture mindset is once we're in a serious relationship, it's okay, regardless of whether it's marriage or not. What in the world, like, I'm a pretty mature person, right? What in the world am I saving myself for? Like, they don't care. Whoever I marry is not going to have cared. I can't find anybody who cares about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So they're going to be fine if I've had 3 or 4 partners. They don't. No one's going to be like one partner. Most people are like, wow, I don't even know what to say to that. I respect you. It's just really weird.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you look at I mean, when I get off here and I go in, turn on the TV, one of the very first things that's going to hit me in the face is sex. We're inundated with it. And people who, well, you said even Christian people though, but we've tried to raise.
Yeah, I don't date anybody who's not a Christian.
Yeah. It's just, our culture has become a culture where it's as common as brushing your teeth anymore. Just, it's sad, but it's in books. I'm reading the greatest book, and then it's like, oh my gosh, this should be one of those with those guys on the. I mean, they slide it into books, they slide it into magazines. The music, I don't even want to think about. The TV, we're just consumed. So yeah.
Okay, but that's not in evangelical circles though. At least not as much. We tend to go the other direction. That's in the culture, the larger world.
Yeah.
So maybe this would be a question of wisdom too. In what ways are we supposed to be different than the culture?
What about self-control? It's
yeah. I read a lot of verses on that.
Yeah, did you? I'm sorry, I missed
you
it.
missed it.
Yeah, and this is such an important aspect of not only Christian living, but if you look at ancient wisdom in different areas, it's definitely emphasized. Abstaining from worldly pleasures, and so if you look at the medieval monastics, they were huge on abstaining from anything practically that give you pleasure. I mean, people lived off rice, and so my goal, what I'm trying to get at is if it's just a foretaste of what is in the heavenly realm, right? Is what we're supposed to be having a foretaste of is the actual heartstrings, not the physical aspect of it, but the actual intimacy that's there, the love that we're talking about, this agape love. It has nothing to do with the physicality of the situation at all. It's so much more than that. Their actual reality is what we don't see. This is temporal, right? Time, space, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So what we actually are trying to glimpse is something that's not material at all. And so what you're getting from sex, whether it's full penetration or ejaculation, either way, it's not even close
to what God
has in store for us.
Right.
And by doing that, we're almost cheating. I don't know. I don't know about that last statement.
Well, I don't know, but we get all that in marriage.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if it's cheating. So you get it in marriage. I don't get it in being a single person. Why is that? Like, is it just to protect my own heart? Is it just because God loves me and he knows that I shouldn't have that?
Before the Reformation, apparently, if I'm a clergyman, I didn't get it in marriage because it wasn't allowed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Catholic priests, that's still the case in the priesthood.
Right.
Yeah.
But for us Reformed.
All right. Well, we got like 3 minutes left. Does anybody have last words they want to say? It's not like I've resolved this in any way.
Oh, yeah. I want to play devil's advocate to your devil's advocate, Jace.
Yes, please.
I'm not so sure it is that we don't care. Or I think you said something, you haven't met people that would be a big issue to. And then I'm wondering, I agree with the point that, there is some harm without the intimacy in the sex act if it's abused. And then, what was the other thought that came up? There's too many good thoughts going on, but let me get into my story. So I was a counselor for 4 years at Purdue University in a residence hall. So I got to experience lots of, hundreds of kids every year, all the same stories. A couple points to make. One, most of the kids that came to me with problems that were related to sex were ones that had abused the sex and they were very disturbed by it. Okay. But the story I really want to relate is a night doing my rounds, come across a room of girls all talking, and they were talking about sex. There was probably about a dozen girls in there or so with different experiences. Some had never had sex, some had had lots of sex. The girls that ever had sex were sharing their experiences, and there was a lot of details, a lot of laughing, a lot of just sharing of experiences for like an hour, and everything was jovial. And of course, I just stayed there to lap it up and listen. But about an hour and a half into it, everything changed, and every girl started crying, and every one of them expressed regret that they ever had sex. Okay, so then a week later, I got the guys in my room, and I'm like, I'm going to run an experiment, because you know how guys are. We're like, oh yeah, I'll be that, right? Okay, of course, guys don't go into as great a detail. They just, oh yeah, you know. But I let it go on with the guys joking, and I'm like, do they care? And after they were all lapping each other up and encouraging each other in their stories of conquest, I said, yeah, but do any of you regret it? Dead silence, stern looks, and every one of them shook their heads, yes. Because it was all meaningless. Yeah. So I think we do care. And I think some of our societal pressures are to send a false message that it doesn't matter. Why are we trying to push that down? Is there something instinctually in us that says it does matter?
Yeah, I think
just because people do it doesn't mean that they don't care. I mean, like, so according to the CDC, the average part of the bell curve is between 2 to 9 partners. Number of people with one partner, 18.6 for women and 11.7 for men. The large portion of the bell curve is between 2 to 9 partners. That's for men and women aged 25 to 49. But just because people are doing it doesn't mean that they don't care. I think it's kind of tough.
And that's not measured. That was my point earlier. What's our metric for determining if this is good or bad?
Your analogy, Todd, has college casual sex. Like, I'm going to hook up with this person instead of, 2-3 year relationship of a serious girlfriend/boyfriend that you are thinking about future marriage and stuff like that with. So it's that group that you were talking to is very different from some Christian circles.
No, it was a mix. There was Christians in the mix, non-Christians. It was a mix.
But they're still in college and they're 18 to 22. Probably not a 3-year relationship is all he's saying. It's a little different than casual sex, right?
It wasn't all casual sex. That's what I'm saying.
So some of it's different. Yeah. Okay. I would even go so far as to say that I think there are times, I've talked with a couple of people that I really respect. There are times, as much as I think it's wise probably to refrain, this would be my end argument here. Wisdom says refrain and be careful. There's no judgment on anyone here at all, not even the slightest bit. But there might be times when, I hesitate to even say this, so I'm just going to say it because we're in a safe place, but I know a couple of women who have absolutely needed it. And because their marriage was miserable and they thought they were broken and they had never had any pleasure and they hated their body and they hated everything about them, and they needed someone to show them that love and for them to get pleasure in sex again outside of marriage. And it turned them around. It wasn't casual. It wasn't like happening all the time. It was an experience that almost saved them. And so I kind of want to see that side of things as well. And maybe they were wrong. No judgment. It seemed to me that it was a healthy thing. So I don't even know. All right.
I've got another example of.
All right, go Travis.
A friend of a friend. So take it for what it was. So hearsay information, full disclosure, that the woman developed cancer and is no longer able to be there for the man, and so like they've agreed in their relationship that he can sleep with someone else.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So this isn't the free pass thing. This is a consensual, like, I know I can't take care of what you need.
Right, and she's okay with it. Whether or not she's totally okay with it, but she's okay with it.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Hannah.
I think going back to the whole purity culture thing and the backlash from my kids stating goodbye and the purity culture backlash, I think a lot of that backlash comes not from the fact that there are rules, but from what the church does with the rules. And what they do is they put a lot of shame on. So like, what happens if you become a Christian, you know, in your 20s and you had already had all of those college experiences and you were raised in a way where you were told it doesn't matter, just do whatever you want, and then suddenly you have all this shame. Or if you were raped and now you've lost your virginity to not by choice, and it's there's this, you know, they do the whole like, you've got your flower and you crush it and now it's not perfect anymore. Well, I didn't choose to crush it. That's, you know, like the person who that happened to, that was not their choice, but there's still, so there's like that whole thing where it's like,
Yeah.
even if you there, it just doesn't feel like there's a lot of grace for people who made choices that were outside of the rules for a reason, whether it was right or wrong. There still should be grace for that, especially if the person says, yeah, I regret it, I wish I hadn't done it. I mean, and even if they don't regret it, you know, like, I think that there does need to be some leniency in the fact that people make decisions for themselves based on what they think is right. And I know that, you know, the Bible does have its guidelines and things, but there also needs to be some grace for decisions that people make for themselves personally that might have consequences eventually.
Yeah, I think that's so good, and maybe a good place to end with kind of a reminder to the church, since all of you, I think, are in the church, that regardless of where you come down on this, whether, poor choice of words, but no matter, regardless of what decisions you make, I saw people smiling, so I know Travis. So yeah, no matter what decision you make, there's somebody who's going to disagree with you, and they're going to be hurting. So even as I've said this, even when I've said, here's my stance on this, someone on this panel right now is thinking, well, I didn't hold myself to those standards, and now I feel guilty or shamed. And dear God, I hope that doesn't happen here. That was not the intent, but it can't happen in the church. And pastors have got to grow up and stop making everything follow these black and white rules. Just, people are going to make different decisions. And yeah, it matters what we do with that purity culture, not whether the rule is broken or not broke. Like, how are we going to love those people? How are you guys going to love the singles in your church? Those of you who are married, and grieve with them that they don't get to enjoy the things that you're getting to enjoy. Okay, because there is a grieving going on. There really is. So you guys, you need to figure out a way to love those people who are, I don't know, maybe suffering silently. Yeah, well, thanks, Hannah. I think the church has really been a mess when it comes to sex. It's always been the worst sin for some reason. And we're so shamed over it, and it's just tragic.
And I think it's important too to remember that no matter how the church looks at someone and treats them, they're not the final judge. God is, and he knows people's hearts. And when we make wrong decisions, because we all do, I guess it's hurtful the way the church looks at us and stuff sometimes, but it's real important just to encourage people to keep in mind that it's between them and God, not all the hypocrites in the church.
Yeah, that's good. All right. I didn't really even do the movement hermeneutic in here to see if we need to change it, but this was a good discussion. I'm probably, unless largely convinced otherwise, this will probably be the end of this conversation. Maybe we'll do a whole section. I've had a couple people say, let's do a whole section on sex, like 4 weeks on it. I'd need to do a lot more work before I did that. So next week, I believe, according to my team that started this group, We're going to start a class on how to read the Bible, and probably about a dozen or so classes on basic interpretational things. None of them will be that basic. Trust me, that you'll learn something no matter what no matter what kind of seminary backgrounds you've had, if you've had any. So love to see you guys next week. I'll be live in Warsaw. So if you are in Indiana, hopefully you will be at the office at McConnell offices, which is where we'll be doing it live. Love to have you guys sitting around the table with me. The rest of you, same time, same bat channel, etc. See you guys.